Endangered penguins get help from surprising friends. Before we continue with the rest of the video, we could use your help. Click the like button to help spread word about watchJojo animals, and also be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. When it comes to saving endangered species, there are no easy answers. Conservation groups are often stretched so thin that their efforts, no matter how passionate, fall short. That is why third parties getting involved can make a real difference in the fight. Beloved animals on this Australian island started to go extinct, and park rangers were at a total loss. Fortunately for everyone, a couple of unlikely Good Samaritans offered up some unconventional ideas that could very well save the day. Phillip Island, located just south of Melbourne, made a real splash with its penguin parade. Visitors eagerly lined up to watch the adorable wildlife make trips to and from the shore. But the parades might just end soon, for good. The aptly named little penguin is the smallest variety of penguin, with a weight of approximately 2 pounds. In the past, you couldn't look anywhere in Phillip Island without spotting a couple of them, but recently their numbers were thinning. Due to an influx of foxes and other predators, the helpless penguins found themselves hunted down at an extreme rate. On one gruesome day, predators killed 180 of the poor penguins. By 2015, conservationists could only find 6 penguins on the entire island. Park rangers on Phillip Island had a real problem on their hands. Aside from the tourism revenue that kept the reserve going, the near extinction of the little penguins threatened the entire ecosystem. Nobody was quite sure what to do, but then a colourful chicken farmer named Swampy Marsh stepped forward. He had a trick he used in his everyday work that he figured might just save the plummeting penguin population. To keep his flock of chickens safe from any would-be hunters, Swampy invested in a few Marmara sheepdogs to prowl his fields. These born herders chased away predators while also moving the birds to safer locations when needed. If the Maremas could shield some chickens, he wondered, could they do the same for penguins? Phillip Island understood they had no real other option. They got to training some dogs as soon as they could. Before long, Phillip Island set the dogs on a guard patrol. The Maremas didn't even have handlers with them. A self-reliant breed, they alone covered the expanse of the island. The park rangers waited with bated breath. Sure enough, the sheepdogs did the trick. Foxes and other predators fled to the mainland, and the little penguin community started bouncing back. Soon, in fact, their numbers climbed back into the triple digits. The Marema experiment was such a success that it inspired a family film called Oddball. However, another species threatened the struggling birds: mankind. Man-made disasters pose possibly the biggest threat to endangered species all over the world. For the little penguins, recent oil spills off the Australian coast wreaked havoc to their habitat. Fortunately, conservation groups stepped in to help clean up the animals and their homes. But one quick scrub couldn't wash away the entire problem. The oil spill can cause longer-lasting problems, like reducing the penguins' ability to retain body heat. As luck would have it, a novel solution would come from these halls in southwest Australia. But make no mistake, this was no laboratory or gifted school. The penguin saviour would come from a nursing home. Alfie Date was already remarkable, as he held the title of Australia's oldest man. Nevertheless, even at 109 years of age, he still had the energy to make a difference. Moved by the penguin's story, he pulled out some yarn and his knitting needles. With no time to lose, Alfie started knitting up a storm. A stack of colourful garments piled up next to his chair. Once Alfie's hands couldn't make one more stitch, he called the nurses to ship his hard work off to Phillip Island. Crazy as it sounds, Alfie knitted sweaters for the penguins, and it worked. The perfectly sized clothing kept the birds warm and improved their buoyancy in the water. Plus, they didn't look half bad. Once other Australians got wind of Alfie's heroic craftsmanship, they began sending their own penguin sweaters to Phillip Island, with some really cool designs to boot. You could almost say that Alfie's sweater gambit worked a little too well. Staff on Phillip Island became so overwhelmed with penguin clothing that they had to ask people to stop sending it over. The birds only needed the sweaters for a short while, and yet park rangers had enough to put on a whole fashion show. However, the sweaters going viral raised a ton of awareness about the little penguin's plight. People all over the world, not just around Melbourne, took notice of how important these birds were to the ecosystem. Ever since, the penguins' numbers have continued their steady growth. Whoever thought a few dogs and some knitting could save an entire population from the brink of extinction? Researchers in other parts of the world saw dwindling populations of another species. In the deep dark corners of the Bolivian rainforest, for instance, there lived this frog with a wide brown body, big green eyes and an orange chest, holding an empty heart. He was alone. He had been for a very, very long time. There, from the tropical freshwater marsh, he was captured by scientists who had never laid eyes on one of his kind before. To further study him, they brought the fat-bellied frog back to their labs. Ever since that day, the frog had been living at the Cochabamba Natural History Museum, where he was given the name Romeo. The question for the lonely frog was this: would he find his one true love, or would love be a smoke made with the fume of sighs? See, at first, researchers and frog experts assumed that Romeo was the very last Shecanas water frog remaining on Earth. After all, his habitat had been greatly affected by deforestation and climate change. But both the researchers and Romeo refused to give up hope. Their new goal for the next decade was to find him a Juliet. If the two got along, he would no longer be lonely, and if they really got along, they might be able to repopulate the Shecanas species. For the scientists, boosting the frog's population was a beneficial goal in more ways than one. They'd save another species from extinction, further study these little guys, and restore balance in the delicate ecosystem of the Amazon rainforest. Thus, the biologists got to work. They searched endlessly throughout the forest and even created a profile for Romeo on Match.com. Still, for an entire decade, one remained the loneliest number. Zoologist Teresa Camacho then led a frog search expedition in December of 2018. She and her team would stick their hands in creeks and feel for water frogs, since the creatures can't easily be spotted underwater. "We were tired, wet and disappointed," said Camacho, who believes the contaminated waterways on top of all the other habitat changes have driven the Shecanas water frog close to extinction. "Then I said, let's do one more creek." Suddenly, Camacho and her team heard a tiny splash and noticed some movement in the water. They reached for the creature right away, but alas, it was an entirely different species of frog. However, not all hope was lost. That frog jumped away, leading the team to a tiny waterfall. There, underneath the stream of a little crashing wave, researchers saw a brown frog with big green eyes and an orange belly. Unfortunately, this frog would not be Romeo's partner in repopulating the species. While this little fella could have been great company to the museum loner, he was a male. Still, this meant there were more Shecanas out there. There was hope to finding Romeo a Juliet. The next day, the crew returned to the creek one more time, and bingo! They managed to capture 4 more frogs, 2 males and 2 females. While 3 of them were too young to reproduce, 1 female was exactly the right age. Now all they needed was some chemistry. Although Romeo found no luck in online dating, this adult female could very well be the one. Could his life of isolation finally be over? It was a tough call, because she had a completely opposite personality from Romeo's. "Romeo is really calm and relaxed, and doesn't move a whole lot," Camacho Badini told BBC. "Juliet," she said, "was really energetic. She swims a lot and she eats a lot, and sometimes she tries to escape." On Valentine's Day of 2019, the 2 love frogs would be set up on their very first date, in the hopes of procreating and saving their entire species. No pressure though, right? If their personalities weren't compatible, the looks could be all they needed. She has beautiful eyes. the museum director Ricardo Cespedes said about Juliet, who was quarantined until lab tests came back. Scientists needed to make sure she was free of the dangerous chytrid fungus known to have killed entire frog populations before she met Romeo, otherwise she could have done much more harm than good. Romeo was actually quite shy, didn't swim much, and was a little overweight, but that could change. We'll have to provide some sort of current to get him a little more exercise, Camacho said. If Romeo didn't get kissed and turned into a prince, there were always a few other solutions. The biologists could attempt in vitro fertilization or rely on the younger frogs to breed when they are ready. The Bolivian Museum of Natural History has previously succeeded in preserving the rare Titicaca frog. So if anyone is up for saving the chacunas, it's these well-trained experts. Now all that was left was to wait for Valentine's Day and see whether the Montague-Capulet romance would bloom. At least for now, Romeo no longer has to live in solitude, and there's gonna be one less lonely frog.